We come to the book of Leviticus chapter 24. One of the things you notice as you're going through the Old Testament, much of what's being written is very specific to the nation of Israel. And it's very pointed to the life that God was now directing them to. And there are times when you read through it and you go, what does that have to do with me? And I would just encourage you that everything we're reading, here's what it tells us in 2 Timothy 3:16. It says, for all scripture is given by inspiration of God, and it is profitable. It's profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction. And so we're looking at really what we would consider the law. But within the law, God is trying to teach the children of Israel some of the precepts and some of the context of what you and I would look at as we go into the New Testament. And I think it lays that background for us, that Jesus coming on the scene and doing what he did, there was a context to all of that. And that he had established things so that we would see him way before he came on the scene. We would see his fingerprints in the Old Testament writings, that we would see his mark through all of these things that God had established. Now we're going to be looking at the tabernacle once again. And if you remember, in the tabernacle had badger skin around the outer courts, and then it had an inner court where there would be the holy place, and then there would be the courtyard, the holy place, and then there would be the holiest of holies. And in the holiest of holies is where the presence of God would dwell. And what's incredible as you look at this whole picture is that when we get into the book of Numbers shortly, one of the things he lays out is all of the tribes of Israel, and he begins to lay them out from the east, the west, the north, and the south, and they would literally line up as they would camp and in a fashion that the tabernacle would be the center, and everything would go eastward, east, west, north, and south off of the tabernacle. And if you were looking at the children of Israel in a camp at night or in the morning, or as they were, out in the middle of the desert, it would really be a picture of the cross. And at the center of it would be the tabernacle, which really is speaking what? Of God's presence and God's Spirit. And it's for you and I, it's no longer him dwelling in a building, it's now him dwelling at the center of your life. His presence with you wherever you go. He leads you, he guides you. In the Old Testament, it was by a fire by night and by a cloud by day. In the New Testament, it's God's Spirit living inside of you, and he's with you day and night, 24/7, 365. He's with you wherever you go. And what's incredible is that in the middle of that tabernacle would be this place that was called the holy place. And it was there that the priest would constantly be laboring. He would be refilling the oil that would burn. He would do that morning and evening. And then once a week, he would go, and the bread that would be in that room, to the left side would be the lampstand, to the right side would be the showcase of bread, and they would have 12 loaves of bread, and then right in front of him would be the holiest of holies, and right in front of the holiest of holies was the altar of incense. And the incense would be burning continually, and what was happening is that was a picture of the saints and the prayers that would be ascending into the heavens. And as we come to this 24th chapter, again, he's laying out for us not only the role of the priest and what he was to be doing, but he's laying out for us how God was to be at the center of everything they were doing. Just like he's to be at the center of everything we're doing. In every arena, in every instance that we need to be asking the question, man, where is God in my private life? Where is God in my in my social life? Where is God amongst my family, amongst my friends, and, wherever I find myself in the workplace? Where does God in the middle of that? Is he at the center, or am I kind of pushing him off to the side? And all these different arenas that we find ourselves in. And it's amazing because he's gonna show them that, he not only is he at the center of Israel, but he's in the center of the tabernacle. Notice in chapter 24, as we continue, watch what he says. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, command the children of Israel that they bring to you pure oil of pressed olives for the light, to make the lamps burn continually. Outside the veil of the testimony in the tabernacle of meetings, Aaron shall be in charge of it evening until morning before the Lord continually. It shall be a statute forever in your generation. He shall be in charge of the lamps and on the pure gold lampstand before the Lord. Check it out, continually. Now here's the picture. The children of Israel were required to bring the olive, and the olive oil was to be pressed. It wasn't to be boiled. There's other methods of producing the oil, but it had to be pure oil pressed. And they would come every day, and they would provide the oil that would go into the lampstand so that a light would continually be in the lampstand. Now, when you walked into the tabernacle, one of the things in the construction of it is that there's no windows there. And without the lamp, you wouldn't be able to see anything. And so you'd walk in, you would, on the left hand, have this lampstand with 6 different bowls in it that would be lit. And what's fascinating about this whole picture is that it's really, what did we find out earlier? The tabernacle is a shadow of heaven. And what we know about heaven is that there's no natural light there. There's no sun. In the book of Revelations 21:23, it says the city had no need of the sun or the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God illuminated it. The Lamb is its light. The Lamb is Jesus. And he's going to illuminate heaven. There's not going to be a need for a sun. There's not going to be a need for a moon, because his presence will be illuminating all of heaven. There's not going to be night there any longer. It's going to be all day, because his presence is going to be continuous in heaven. And this is the picture he's giving us of this tabernacle inside this holy place. I think it also gives us a picture of what? The Word of God. It tells us in Psalm 119, 105, it says, the Word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Guys, you want to be, directed. You want to be able to walk without stumbling. Then you have to become a student of this book. You have to know the Word of God. It's the light to your path. It's going to help you illuminate the right way to walk, so that you don't fall and stumble and trip or go off a cliff. The Word of God, it lights the way for you. Matter of fact, in the book of 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 19, I love this verse. He says, and so we have the prophetic word confirmed, which you do well to heed as a light that shines in a dark place. You do well to heed the prophetic word as a light that shines in a dark place. And we're living in a dark place, aren't we? We need the light. Because there's so many different philosophies and so much confusion, so many false teaching, so many people trying to pull us one way or pull us another way. And yet what? God has given us the light so that we can navigate in the middle of a dark place that we're living in. How many times, I know personally where, it's pitch dark, got all the lights out. I get up to, go to the restroom or something, and I stub my toe on the side of the bed. I remember one night, man, I thought I broke it. Start screaming there, jumping around in the middle of the night. My wife's, dead asleep. What in the world happened to you? Nothing. The darkness, you have no ability to know what's in front of you if you're living in darkness. But God's given us the light so that we can have clarity and so that the path is lit up so we know where to walk. And this is cool because in John chapter 1, verse 1, here's what the scripture says. John 1:1, it says this, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. And check this out. In him was life, and the life was the light of man. And then the next verse says this, and the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Jesus, man. And anytime the scripture is making a reference to the light, it's a reference to Jesus himself, and he's lighting up inside the holy place as the priest would go inside there to care for not only the lamps, but he would care for the incense, and he would care for the showbread that would be there every day. And it would have to burn continually. And I think there's the key, because it has to be something that isn't, I'll put the light out for a little while so I can do what I want to do, and then I'll put the light back on whenever I'm done doing what I want to do. No, the light has to shine continuously in our life. And it's cool because he tells them here that, they were to, be caring for, to make sure that the light continues to shine. And that's really our role, right? We're called priests in the New Testament. That means we're making sure that the light is always shining, that it doesn't go out, that we're constantly in the Word, we're constantly in prayer, we're constantly seeking the Lord, asking God for wisdom. And so you have that picture. And then he goes to verse 5, and then he moves from the light, and then he goes to the bread that was in the tabernacle. Look what he says in verse 5. He says, and you shall take fine flour and bake 12 cakes with it. 2/10 of an ephah shall be in each cake. You shall set them in 2 rows, 6 in a row, on the pure gold table before the Lord. And you shall put pure frankincense on each row, that it may be on the bread for a memorial, an offering made by fire to the Lord. Every Sabbath he shall set it in order before the Lord continually, being taken from the children of Israel by an everlasting covenant. And it shall be for Aaron and for his sons, and they shall eat it on the holy, in a holy place, for it is most holy to him, from the offerings of the Lord made by fire, by a perpetual statute. Perpetual. Now, what's incredible is that there would be these 12 loaves. You got on the left-hand side, you walk into this holy place, you have the lampstand, and then you go on the right-hand side, and there was the showbread. And there were 12 loaves, and the 12 loaves represented each of the tribes of Israel. So when the high priest was inside there, he was not only, caring for the light, but he was being reminded that there's 12 tribes in the nation of Israel. Now, not all of them lived around Jerusalem. Many were scattered throughout the land of Israel. And just because they weren't visible to the high priest, didn't mean that he wasn't to be concerned and interceding and praying for all of the different tribes. So you have 12 pieces of showbread, and they would all be stacked up, and most believe that there would have been, a row of 6 and a row of 6, and they would be, and every week, and I don't know what, week-old bread tastes like, but because, it wasn't put in a Wonder Bread bag or nothing. This was just bread sitting out, all week long. And then it says at the end of I don't know, maybe they used it for croutons on their salad or something, because I can only imagine after a week of just bread sitting out for the week. But the priest every week they would consume the bread, and then they would get fresh bread, and every week they would be changing it. And it was just constantly reminding them that God was concerned even for their substance. And God's concerned for your substance. He knows what you need, man. Not only does he know what you need, man, he promised us that if we would seek him first, that he would take care of all of those needs. He knows you need to eat. He knows you need clothes on your back. He knows you need a roof over your head. God is aware of all those things. What the real question is, are you willing to trust him? And it's going to be faith. Because when you put God first, in your life, one of the things you realize is that, all of the other worries of life begin to crawl in and creep in. So that it wants to distract us from putting God first. Man, I gotta, and we start worrying about food, we start worrying about clothes, we start worrying about house, we start worrying about, all of the bills. And, it's so easy to be distracted, but to remember that, God's my supplier, and he's the bread of life. He's the bread of life. He can sustain you no matter what. It's interesting, in John chapter 6, verse 33, Jesus said this, "For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven, and he gives life to the world." And he said to him, "Lord, give us this bread always." And Jesus said to them, "I am the bread of life, and he who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst." You see, really, guys, our role is what? To come to him. To constantly be seeking after him. He's the only one who can satisfy your hunger. Because the hunger he's talking about isn't just an appetite. He's talking about our greatest need, man, to know him. And so he lays out for them that they were to care for the showbread, that they were to bring the flour, they were to bake the bread, and then every week, man, they would once again restock, and then they would eat the week-old bread, and the priest would do it. And then in verse 10, you come to this section, you kind of, wait a second, where does this fit? Because he's going to talk to us now about an incident that took place in the camp. Is they had the camp, there would be, this area where they would consider it, the place where they would meet with God, and then they would be where they would be living, and then as they would be in the middle of all of this, there would be a place they would call outside the camp, right? And so watch what happens. Look at verse 10. "Now the son of an Israelite woman whose father was an Egyptian went out among the children of Israel, and this Israelite woman's son and a man of Israel fought each other in the camp. And the Israelite woman's son blasphemed the name of the Lord and cursed, and so they brought him to Moses. His mother's name was Shulamith, the daughter of Dibri of the tribe of Dan. And they put him in custody that the mind of the Lord might be shown to them." Now, it was already laid out for them, if someone blasphemed the Lord from within Israel, that they were to be stoned to death immediately. And what's incredible is that they have a man here who had an Egyptian father and a Jewish mother. And Moses at this point goes, man, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do. And I love that Moses had enough humility to go, you know what, guys? Before we make any decision, let's go find out the mind of God. That you really, think about how amazing that is. That Moses realizes, you know what, I can't just make a decision unless I know what God's heart is and what God's thoughts are on the issue. Man, that would be a wise thing for all of us. I want to know God's heart and God's mind before I make any decisions in my life. What does God say about this? And it's what's incredible is that Moses takes the time. So what did they do? Watch this. Look at verse 12. They put him in custody that the mind of the Lord might be shown to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, take outside the camp him who has cursed. Then let all who heard him lay their hands on his head, and let all the congregation stone him. And you shall speak to the children of Israel, saying, whoever curses his God shall bear his sin. And whoever blasphemes the name of the Lord shall surely be put to death, and all the congregation shall surely stone him, the stranger as well as him who is born in the land. When he blasphemes the name of the Lord, he shall be put to death. Wow. Harsh, wasn't it? You kind of, wow. I mean, the guy blasphemed the name of the Lord. Now, he cursed the Lord. I mean, we don't know, what that looked like or what exactly happened. But one of the things we do know is that God, in this point, was wanting the children of Israel to know that God is a holy God. He's a holy God. Whenever the Jews would write the name of God, what they would do is that, first of all, they would never, ever try to pronounce God's name. Whenever you see the word Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, it's YHWH in the Hebrew, because they would never use the vowels so that they didn't try to pronounce the name of God, because God's name was so holy. Even to this day, if a Jew's writing the name of God, they'll put G-D, because they don't even want to write God's name, or they don't even want to pronounce God's name, because they don't want to blaspheme it. It was really talking about what? The holiness of God. And then not only showing the holiness of God here, but one of the things that they would do is that if a scribe was writing God's name down, the scribe, before he began to write God's name, he would go and he would take a bath and he would wash his clothes, and then he would come back and he would write God's name, and as soon as he finished, he would go back again and he would wash and he would cleanse himself once again and then continue with the book. I was reading one commentator saying that someone that was a new scribe, what they would do is they would actually write the book of Esther, because the name of God isn't used in the book of Esther, so they'd have some time to practice before they actually began to write the rest of the scriptures. And it's incredible, because one of the things that would happen, if they messed up the name of God, they'd have to throw the whole scroll away, because they knew that the name of God was holy. And if you're going to have a people that are blaspheme the name of God, what's it going to do? It's going to begin to what? To lessen who God is in the nation. And so God wasn't going to put up with it in any way, man. He says, you know what? From at this point on, man, anyone who blasphemes the name of God, they have to be stoned to death. That's the only way you maintain a reverence. And you look at our culture today, man, and how many people have no respect and no honor for God or for the name of God. Think about it. You ever hear someone say, "Oh, Buddha"? Never. That's always the name of God that's being blasphemed. Because what does it do, man? It brings down who God is in the eyes of the people when you misuse his name. And so he just lays out for him very plain. And this is what's cool, because God doesn't just stop there. He begins to what? He begins to talk about, if someone should be stoned if they curse or blaspheme the name of God. And you think, well, isn't that a severe punishment for just cursing or blasphemy? What's interesting, he's going to lay out now other things that are offenses, and that every offense should always be equal to the offense. Not above the offense and not below the offense, but it had to be equal to the offense, because that's what justice does. Justice gives an equal payment to the sin that's committed. So watch how he does this. Watch this. Whoever kills any man shall surely be put to death. Who did God create man in? In the image of God. We were created in the image of God, and God goes, if you kill a man, then you have to pay with your own life. But watch as he continues. If a man kills an animal, he shall make it good, an animal for an animal. Now, if someone kills your dog, and they're like, hey, you gotta give up your dog. You kill your horse, you got to give up your horse. It was an equal payment for what was caused. An animal didn't have the same value as a man. A man the consequence would be death. An animal would be give another animal. We got it backwards in our culture, don't we? You kill a bald eagle, you'll get 30 years to life. You kill a baby, no consequence at all. And when you start to have a wrong view of things, that's how you give justice that's not appropriate. And so God tells them, look, an animal gets an animal, kill. You repay with an animal. Watch this. If a man causes disfiguration of his neighbor, as he has done, so shall it be done to him. So someone disfigures your face, puts a scar across it, well, that guy's got to get a scar. It's equal payment appropriate to the action that was taken. So and that's what justice does. Justice goes, there's an appropriate consequence for the action that's been taken. That's justice. Now, it's interesting that he's not talking about vengeance. Vengeance, it was like, you cut my face, now I'm going to cut both sides of your face. Right? He wants not vengeance. That's not what he's wanting to dispense. He wants to dispense justice. Watch what he does next. Look, if someone causes a fracture, he has to get a fracture. If he takes an eye, you give an eye. A tooth for a tooth. He who has caused disfigurement of a man, so it shall be done to him. See, it's always equal punishment in accordance with the crime. So this is the point. If someone blasphemes God, the cost is death, because that's such a high value that you've belittled. So now there's a high payment, just like if you were to kill a man. There's a high payment. And so he's wanting, this is why he's bringing this to our attention, is that look how severe this is. If a man blasphemes God, it's as though he's killed somebody. It's on that same level. That's what he's laying out. And so he wants them to grasp that. Look what he says, verse 21, whoever kills an animal shall restore it, but whoever kills a man shall be put to death. You shall have the same law for the stranger and for the one from your own country, for I am the Lord your God. And Moses spoke to the children of Israel. He took outside the camp him who had cursed and stoned him with stones. Check it out. So the children of Israel did as the Lord commanded Moses. What are they doing now, man? You know what? This isn't for our decision. This is God's. We're going to obey what God says. And it's not whether we deem it to be too severe or not severe enough. We're just going to do what God has instructed to do because he's the Lord. He's the Lord, not me. I'm not, the one who makes, I don't make the call. God does. That's what Moses was telling them. I'm just doing what God said. And that's a good place to be. Look at chapter 25. Now, God's reminding them that he's holy, right? But he's also going to remind the children of Israel that he owns the land he was about to take them into. He's a holy God. He's a God that's worthy to be praised. He's worthy to be worshiped. He wants to be in the middle of your life, but then he also is reminding them that he was going to take them into the promised land, and the land isn't their land, it was God's land. And God was going to dispense that land to the children of Israel. Every tribe would have a certain piece of property. As we get into the book of Joshua, man, you'll be seeing how God, gave every tribe a particular portion of the land that they were to care for and they were to be responsible for. So watch what happens. And the Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land in which I give you, the land shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord. 6 years ye shall sow your field, and 6 years ye shall prune your vineyard and gather its fruit. But in the 7th year thou shalt be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall neither sow your field nor prune your vineyard. What grows of its own accord of your harvest you shall not reap, nor gather the grapes of your unintended vine, for it is a year of rest for the land. And the Sabbath produce of the land shall be food for you, your male and female servants, you hired man, and the stranger who dwells with you, for your livestock and the beasts that are in the land, and all of its produce shall be for food. Now God had already laid out for them the Sabbath day. They were to labor for 6 days. On the 7th day, they were to rest. But now he's not talking about man, he's talking about the land. And every 6 years, they were to work the land for 6 years, but on the 7th year, they weren't to work the land. They were to let the land rest on the 7th year. Now, it's interesting that the children of Israel didn't obey this command. And for 490 years after they got into the promised land, they never let the land rest. And when God sent them into Babylon, he sent them there for 70 years. And he told them, I'm making up for the 70 years that you were supposed to let the land rest, that you never let the land rest. That's why the children of Israel were in captivity when Daniel was taken into captivity for 70 years, because they never listened to the command that God had given them. Interesting. That they were still going to pay the price, but now the price was going to be greater, because they were going to leave the land barren for 70 years, man. It's just amazing to me. As Jeremiah had told them. And remember when Daniel was reading through the writings of Jeremiah, he realized the 70 years are almost up and we're about to go back into the promised land, because Jeremiah had told them it would be a 70-year captivity because of the land not resting every 7th year. And really, in order to accomplish, that, you really had to what? Trust the Lord. Imagine, you come to the end of the 6th year and you realize, man, this is supposed to be the 7th year. Now, what are we going to do for food next year? We're not supposed to work the land. We have to trust that God's going to provide enough, without us working the land, in order to sustain us for that year. And, God was not only allowing the animals to rest, but he was allowing the men to rest for the 7th year, but he was also allowing the land to rest for the 7th year. But it takes faith to obey God. It takes faith because it doesn't make sense to the natural man. The natural man's going, no way, man, that's scary. I mean, what are we going to do? I'm not going to be able to put no food in the barn for the winter. I'm not going to be able to, have enough to make us through the year. How are we going to make it? And really, it's a matter, hey, God said to do it. Watch what he'll provide for us. And God's asked you and I to what? Not to walk by sight, but to walk by faith. Matter of fact, in Hebrews 11:6, it says this: without faith, it's impossible to please God. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, check this out, and that he's a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Faith isn't just believing that there's a God. Faith is believing that God rewards those who seek after him, who obey him, who follow him, who believe that what he says is true. And so he's laying out for the children of Israel, look, this is how when you get into this land, I'm going to take you to this beautiful land. It's going to be a land flowing with milk and honey. It's going to produce grapes that are going to blow your mind, and you're going to have, produce that's going to be, like you've never seen before. But this is what you're going to do. You're going to let it rest on the 7th year. And what would happen is that the land would re-nurture, and all the nutrients would come back into the ground, and they would continue to produce the way God intended it to. But if you won't walk by faith, then what do? You deplete the land, and so it can't produce. Incredible. And we going to Israel at the beginning of March. I'm taking about 30 people from the church, man. We're going to be, cruising. One of the things that blows my mind every time I go to Israel is how much produce is in the land of Israel. And you feel like you're in New Mexico. Really, the terrain is very, I mean, there was one time I thought, man, I had like some kind of epiphany. We were on Tomei Hill. It looked exactly the same. And this left like, how do we get to New Mexico? We're in Israel. It looks identical, but then you drive down the street and there's citrus trees, oranges and grapefruits and then avocado trees, banana trees, all over down the middle of the desert. You're going, what in the world's going on? Because God blesses his land. And it's incredible because God is laying out for them, look, if you just obey me, I'm going to give you more of an abundance than you can imagine. And he lays out for them as we come to verse 8, man, incredible, because now he's going to talk to them about the year of Jubilee. Check this out. You shall count 7 Sabbaths of years. Now, it's interesting because whenever you start to learn to walk by faith, what's God going to do? He's going to give you opportunity to walk by greater faith. Now you're not going to just trust the Lord every 7 years. One time when you get to that 50th year, you're going to have to trust the Lord for 2 years to provide for you. That's a little scarier. Maybe 1 year, okay, we might get away with it. But 2 years in a row? That's crazy. But God's looking what? He's wanting to stretch your faith. And you'll never be able to take great leaps of faith unless you're willing to take the little leaps of faith. That's one thing I've learned, man, over the last, 25 years walking with the Lord. Going on 29 years walking with the Lord. Is that as I obeyed the Lord and I took little steps of faith, and then I had I had the courage, because I had seen God's faithfulness, to take the next step of faith. And then to take bigger steps of faith. Because I've seen that God is a faithful God. But if you never trust him, you'll never be able to walk in confidence, man. You'll never see miracles. You'll never see God's ability to rescue or to save or to do things. And so God is teaching them, man, okay, it's going to take 50 years to get you up to this point, but on that 50th year, man, now imagine everyone, once in a lifetime would live through a Jubilee. You're born right at the end of a Jubilee. By the time you're 50, you would hit a Jubilee. If you're born in the middle of Jubilee, 25 years old, 25 years later, you're going to hit a Jubilee. And so everyone in Israel would experience at some point a Jubilee in their lifetime, if they reached 50 years old. And what's amazing is that at that point, they would reset their debt. And if you had to sell yourself into slavery to pay a debt, you were automatically set free to go back into your home. This is what he had told them. You return your possessions, because God is the one who had given the possessions to the people. And so he's going to tell them, look, at the 50th year, that Jubilee, whatever land, was wherever it belonged in its original state, it's going to go back to its owner. And then not only that, if there's any debt that's owed, it's wiped away. Wouldn't that be awesome? To have a Jubilee and you go 50 years, man. I'd run up my credit cards on the 49th year. No, I'm kidding. The reality is then no one will give you credit on the 49th year unless you're paying it back by the end of the year, right? I mean, what they were doing is they were giving a reset for everybody, for the land and for the possessions. And what it accomplished is what it kept, you think about what goes on in our culture right now, is that the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer, right? Isn't that, the more money you got, the more money, so what happens now if everyone's wiped clean after every 50 years? It's like a reset. So everyone has the same opportunities. It's cool. I mean, I think that would kind of put everything on a different level, right? And God was establishing that for the kingdom. Because what did he do? We're going to find out as we finish the chapter, is that God cares about the poor. God's concerned about those that have gone through, difficulties in life and trials in life and had bad situations happen in life. And so he's going to give them an opportunity, to reset. And it's cool because, God is laying all of these things out, how they would have to trust the Lord. And then look at verse 11. And the 50th year shall be jubilee to you. In it neither shall sow nor reap, shall grow of its own accord, nor gather the grapes of your unintended vine. For it is the jubilee, it shall be holy to you, and you shall eat its produce from the field. In this year of jubilee, each of you shall return to his possession. If you sell anything to your neighbor or buy from your neighbor's hand, you shall not oppress one another. According to the number of years after the Jubilee, you shall buy from your neighbor, and according to the number of years of crops he shall sell to you. According to the multitude of years, you shall increase its price, and according to the number of years, you shall diminish its price. And he who sells to you according to the number of years of the crops. Therefore you shall not oppress one another, but you shall fear your God, for I am the Lord your God. And God is saying, look, you can lease out your land, but you can't sell your land. Because it's always going to go back to its original owner. And because why? Because God was the original owner. It was his land. And I think even to this day, man, think about what's going on in Jerusalem, and look what's going on in Israel right now, and you got, all these other people trying to make a play for the land of Israel. You got to remember something. It's God's land. It's his land. And so whoever's trying to take God's land, good luck. Because you're messing with the wrong guy. And so it's going to be interesting to see how all this plays out and what's going on, man, especially with, a new administration. And, you got the Palestinians trying to, sway things one way, and the Israelis trying to sway things another way. But, I think keeping in mind that, this is the promised land that God had given to the children of Israel. And it always reverts to them. Even after 1,900 years of not being in the land, God's brought them back into the land, just like he promised. It's amazing. It's just totally amazing. Look at verse 18. It says, so you shall observe my statutes and keep my judgments and perform them, and you will dwell in the land in safety. Then the land will yield its fruit, and you shall eat your fill and dwell there in safety. And if you say, what shall we eat in the 7th year, since we shall not sow nor gather the produce, then I will command my blessings on you in the 6th year, and it will bring forth produce enough, check this out, for 3 years. Notice what God's saying. You just obey me. Watch what I'll do. If you just trust me, you're worried about 1 year, I'll make that land produce for 3 years for you. If you just do what I ask you to do. Guys, and that's the same principle that he wants you and I to live our life. You just obey God. Well, God, what are you going to do? How are you going to do that? Don't worry about it. I can handle it. And I'll do better than what you would have done on your own. If you trust me, if you'll just put your confidence in me, you watch what I'll do. As I'll tell you, I've been blown away by God's provisions year after year. 30 years now, 29 years now. It just blows my mind. When we moved to New Mexico, I had no money. I didn't know how we were going to survive. I didn't. I was just like, God, we're going to trust you. You called me to go, start a church, and we're just going to go. And God every week would just give us enough to get by. Miracle after miracle. And I remember going, man, we're going to give God his tithe no matter what, man. It doesn't matter, because God's going to provide for us. And he would always just meet the needs we had. I remember, and I shared this with you guys, our refrigerator, it was like a 25-year-old refrigerator. We had a 20-year-old washer and dryer. I mean, he just made everything last. It was crazy. I felt like the children of Israel walking in the desert for 40 years with the same shoes and the same, clothes, and because he would just extend the life of everything. And I would be talking to people like, oh yeah, we got a new refrigerator. Ours broke after 5 years. I'm like, dude, I got the bionic refrigerator. Thing never dies. God provides in many different ways. Are you willing to trust him though? And God is coming to them and saying, look, you just do what I told you to do for 1 year, and I'll give you 3 years worth of food. You just trust me. And you shall sow in the 8th year and eat old produce until the 9th year, until its produce comes in, and you shall eat of the old harvest. It goes, man, you're always going to have substance if you trust me. If you put your eyes, and obedience to me. And then in verse 23, man, he's going to go through this whole section where he's going to be dealing with those that had nothing. Watch what he does. And the land shall not be sold permanently. The land is mine. For you are strangers and sojourners, check this out, with me. Isn't that cool? God goes, this is my stuff. Do you realize everything you have isn't yours? It's God's. God owns it all. You've been entrusted as a steward of those things. And God goes, look, all of it belongs to me. And then I love what he says there. Look at verse 24. And in all the land of your possessions you shall grant redemption of the land. If one of your brethren becomes poor and has sold some of his possessions, and if his redeeming relative comes to redeem it, then he may redeem what his brother sold. Or if a man has no one to redeem it, but he himself becomes able to redeem it, then let him count the years since its sale, and restore the remainder of the man to whom he sold it, that he may return to his possession. And if he is not able to have it restored to himself, then what was sold shall remain in the hand of him who bought it until the year of Jubilee, and in the Jubilee it shall be released, and he shall return to his possession. If a man sells a house in a walled city, then he may redeem it within a whole year after it is sold. Within a full year he may redeem it. But if it is not redeemed within the space of a full year, then the house in the walled city shall belong permanently to him who bought it through his generation. It shall not be released in the Jubilee. Now here's what he's saying. Within the walled city, what was the walled city? It was the place of safety. And if you sold your house inside the walled city, he goes, this doesn't apply because it's going to be a way higher value, and it's not fair if you were to go and, you sell it and then get it back after 50 years. Go, if it's within the walled city, that doesn't count. And it's because they weren't working the land inside the walled cities. They would be working the land outside the walled cities. And God was doing all of this for the sake of the land. And so what's incredible is he's laying out for them all the stipulations, but I love this part of it because he tells us very simply this, and this is the cool part of it. He says, look, redemption is possible. Redemption is possible. And it was called the kinsman redeemer. If you had a relative who was able to come and bail you out, then he was able to bail you out. But he had to be someone who was related to you. This is the picture, guys. The kinsman's redeemer. That's why he tells us in the scriptures that Jesus is our kinsman redeemer, because what did he do? He took on our humanity so that he became like us, so that he was able to pay the price for us because we were impoverished spiritually, and he bought us at a price. He purchased you. I was a slave to sin. I was owned by the devil. And God, by his grace, man, came and paid the price so that I didn't have to continue to be enslaved by sin any longer. And he paid that price for you as well. And the moment that you come and you say, God, I surrender, man. I surrender my heart to you, my life to you. At that very moment, man, your life transforms and you belong to him as he purchased you with his own blood. It's incredible. All of these pictures in the Old Testament. The light, the bread, the Redeemer. The year of Jubilee, man, is God wants what? You were created in his image, and he wants you. You're his greatest prize. More important than a piece of land. He loves you. He loved you so much that he died in your stead. And it's incredible because he all of these pictures he's laying out, it's also that you and I would realize who he is and what he's accomplished in our lives. Notice verse 31 now. However, the houses of villages which have no walls around them shall be counted as fields of the country. They may be redeemed, and they shall be released in the Jubilee. Nevertheless, the cities of the Levites, the house of the city of their possession, the Levites may redeem it at any time. If a man purchases a house from the Levite, then the house that was sold in the city of his possession shall be released in the Jubilee. For the house of the cities of the children of the Levites are their possessions among the children of Israel, but the field of the common land of their cities may not be sold, for it is their perpetual possession. If any of your brethren becomes poor, again, this is the second time God's talking about those who, run into some kind of difficulty and they borrow money and then they become poor. He says he falls into poverty among you, and you shall help him like a stranger or a sojourner, that he may live with you. Take no usury or interest from him, but fear your God, that your brother may live with you. You shall not lend him your money for usury, nor lend him your food at a profit. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be your God. And God is going, look, if someone's going to borrow something, you don't charge him interest if he's your brother. And you're not going to take advantage of his difficult time that he's going through, and someone charging exorbitant interest rates, that's an offense to God. That's what he's saying. And he's going, he's going through a hard time. Help him out, but don't try to take advantage of him when he's down. And so he lays out this whole picture for them. And then verse 39, he says, and if any of your brethren who dwells by you becomes poor, and he sells himself to you, you shall not compel him to serve as a slave. As a hired servant and a sojourner, he shall be with you, and shall serve you until the year of Jubilee. And then he shall depart from you, he and his children with him, and he shall return to his own family, and he is returned to the possession of his father. For they are my servants, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold as slaves. You shall not rule over them with rigor, but you shall fear your God. And as for your male and your female slaves whom you have, from the nations that are among you, from them you may buy male and female slaves. Moreover, you may buy the children of the strangers who dwell among you, and their families who are with you, with which they beget in your land, and they shall become your property, and you may take them as an inheritance for your children after you, to inherit them as a possession, that they shall be your permanent slaves. But regard to your brethren, the children of Israel, you shall not rule over them one another with vigor. So if a sojourner, a stranger close to you becomes rich, and one of your brethren who dwells by him becomes poor, and he sells himself to the stranger or sojourner close to you, or to a member of the stranger's family, after he's sold, he may be redeemed again. One of his brothers may redeem him, or if his uncle or his uncle's son may redeem him, or anyone who's near akin to him in his family may redeem him, or if he's able, he may redeem himself. Thus he shall reckon with him who bought him. The price of his release shall be according to the number of years from the year he was sold to him until the year of Jubilee, and it shall be according to the time of a hired servant for him. If there are still many years remaining, according to them he may repay the price of his redemption from the money with which he had bought. And if there remain a few years until the year of Jubilee, then he shall reckon him according to his years, and he shall repay him the price of his redemption. He shall be with him a yearly hired servant, and he shall not rule with rigor over him in your sight. And if he is not redeemed in these years, then he shall be released in the year of Jubilee, he and his children with him. For the children of Israel are servants to me. They are my servants whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Now, God is not condoning slavery. You see, in that culture, if you had a debt and you couldn't pay your debt, you would what? You would give yourself over, and that's how you would pay your debt off. And so what he was laying out, he goes, look, at some point, depending on the debt and depending the time before Jubilee, he goes, all of these things, but there would be you can actually purchase someone back and pay the debt that they owed. for that person's life. And so he's laying out all of these stipulations, and he's reminding them what? That he's the one who's able to redeem them. And he's the one who redeemed you and me. Guys, throughout the New Testament, the word redemption is used constantly. And it was a reminder of this chapter. That you and I were slaves, and we had a master who was cruel. And that master wanted to own you forever. But God, in his grace, is willing to purchase you so that you can be freed from the power of sin and from the consequence of sin. And you have these pictures all the way through the scriptures, man, and it's an amazing picture, because maybe you're here tonight and you realize, you know what, I've never made a decision to follow Jesus. I never asked Jesus to come in my heart. I know that, and it was interesting. I was talking to a young man this week. I said, let me ask you, man. Started asking him, do you lie? He goes, yeah, I lie. Do you steal? Yeah, I steal. And I just began going through the whole thing. I said, do you realize, man, that because of you just confess that you're a lying, cheating, thieving, man, you deserve hell. And he kind of, with the big eyes, he goes, I know that already. What do I do? Dude, all you need to do is ask Christ to forgive you. That's it. You mean I don't have to join nothing, or I don't have to do nothing? You by faith ask Christ, and God's going to begin this work in your life. He's going to change you. And doesn't mean you're going to be perfect, but you're not going to feel normal sinning any longer, because there's going to be a conviction of the Holy Spirit when you do those things. And it was a cool conversation, because that by the end of the night, the end of that time, that the young man said, man, I want Jesus in my heart. I want to ask Christ to come on. And maybe you're here tonight and you realize, you know what? If I died today, I know I would go to hell. I know it. It doesn't have to be that. All you have to do is confess your sin and then ask God to change you and to fill you with his Holy Spirit. Just like in the tabernacle where God's Spirit would be living, God's Spirit can be living inside of you. But you have to acknowledge by faith that you need him, and confess that you're a sinner, and ask God to not only take away the sin, but to begin to change you so that you're no longer living a life in rebellion to God.